I was working one night building Underhill, the earth roof home that my wife Nancy and I have been building in New Jersey for several years. And I was up on top of a wall I was building with floodlights hanging up. And suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, a short distance above my head, I saw something white flash through the air. And I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but I started to pay more attention. And then I saw something white catching the lights of the floodlights glide from one tree to another. And I thought to myself, did I just see a flying squirrel? Like Rocky from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show? That can't be real. This can't be real. In all my years of living in New Jersey, I've never seen a flying squirrel. But you know what? That little thing that I saw and then was gone, it was a flying squirrel. They're not even rare. There are two kinds of flying squirrels that live in North America. The northern ones are way up in northern U.S. all the way into the Arctic, but the southern flying squirrels are all over the place, from southern Canada all the way to Central America. So that's definitely what I saw. Everything in this life, some from the worst to the best, often takes the shape of something where you think it's not real until you discover that it is. And something that can be pretty cool. Hi, this is Jim's Friday Freakout. I'm James Michael Riley. Welcome to today's show. And today we're looking at this can't be real, things that can't be true until they are. And mixed in with the true things today is one thing that's fake. See if you can spot it. If you enjoyed today's show, please like and subscribe below. It'll really help us out. Okay. Earlier this week on our episode of Worse, which is Tales of Strength and Endurance from the Old Days. It comes out fresh every Monday on James Michael Riley Studios. We looked at the story of John Coulter, an early fur trapper who worked in the wilderness of the western U.S., what later became the U.S., in the early 1800s, and who was captured by some Blackfeet, was forced to strip bare and to run for his life while pursued him. He actually got away. But there's another part to his story. John Coulter was also someone that prior to this experience, he did a lot of exploration in the area of Montana and Wyoming. And he's probably the first person of European descent to set foot in what is now Yellowstone National Park and to see some of the geothermal features. Now, when he came back to civilization and told people about these, they called it Coulter's Hell. But we now know it as the geysers of Yellowstone and some of the geothermal features around Cody, Wyoming, which are more likely of the two the ones that Coulter actually saw. Well, if people didn't believe his story, which we all know is true now, then what would they have thought of what we might have called Coulter's even worse? Now, this is a story that Coulter did not bring back with him for a very good reason. It happened about 15,000 years ago. As the last ice sheet that came down into that part of the United States retreated as the last ice age ended. It had, during its many, many centuries or thousands of years there, caused the flow of some rivers to back up and formed an enormous lake called Missoula Lake. Missoula Lake had about as much water in it as Lake Huron has today, so it was the size of one of our Great Lakes. And as the glacier retreated, a moment arrived about 15,000 years ago when all of the water was released in a catastrophic flood. The water poured through a narrow gap with a force equal to 35,000 times the flow of Niagara Falls. The water took about 48 hours to reach the Pacific Ocean. Along the way, it formed lakes temporarily that were 700 feet deep. And it created an area in Washington called the Scablands, because it scoured away all the vegetation and all the soil from the rock in that area. And that's probably actually an area that John Coulter did go through, because from 1803 to 1806, he was part of the Lewis and Clark expedition that explored that part of the United States and were the first Europeans to travel cross-continent to the Pacific Ocean. So he saw the results, but maybe it's just as well in terms of his credibility, they didn't bring the story of the flood back with him. There was a scientist named George Shaw who lived in the late 1700s. Now, this is not George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright. This is a different guy, George Shaw, who was presented in 1799 with a specimen of an animal. This animal had the bill of a duck. It had the front webbed feet of a duck, but it had the fur of a beaver, the back legs more similar to an otter. And if you look closely at it, you would discover that, unlike an otter, each of those back feet also had a sharp spur, which Shaw may or may not have known was venomous. Shaw very rightly said to himself, someone's pulling my chain. Or as he put it, this excites the belief that someone has created some sort of deception. And he actually cut the creature apart looking for the stitches that the alleged jokester had used to put together this mythical creature. But as we all know, he had a real item on his hands, and it's what we call the platypus. At the time, Shaw suggested a taxonomic term that is the correct Latin name for the creature as Platypus anatinus. Unfortunately, the platypus part was already in use to describe the ambrosia beetle. Now, why on earth those are considered to have flat feet, which I think is what platypus means, is beyond me. But they decided to move on from that name. And ultimately, the scientific community determined that it would be called Ornithorhynchus anatinus. Well, that's great for those of us who wish to speak in the scientific terminology. But Shaw's original stab at the name stuck. And to this day, we know that amazing creature as the duck-billed platypus. This can't be real. And it really shouldn't be, except it is. In sparsely populated areas of Wyoming, well, from a New Jersey perspective, let's face it, Wyoming is 11 times the size of the state that I live in and has only 7% of the population of New Jersey. So instead of saying in sparsely populated areas of Wyoming, why don't we just say in Wyoming? In Wyoming, there is a mythical creature that has been reported by many, many different people over the years. Some say it's merely a myth, but as this postcard clearly describes, some allege that it actually exists, or as they put it, it is alleged to actually exists, showing that though trappers and adventurers have made their way to Wyoming, proofreaders may still have not made the journey yet. At any rate, the jackalope is a creature that supposedly, small world, was also first identified by John Coulter. At least that's how the story goes, who, traveling through the region in the early 1800s, saw this amazing creature. It has the body of a jackrabbit and the horns of an antelope. Now, interestingly, the antelope is the fastest land mammal in North America. It can run 60 miles per hour. Now that's not a really terrific strategy to be able to sprint at 60 miles an hour to get away from what is the main predator species in that area now, which is wolves. They're long haul runners. You may be able to sprint away from them, but they'll chase you for miles and miles and miles. So sometimes scientists think that the pronghorn antelope evolved with that sprinting strategy to get away from a now extinct species of predator, the saber-toothed tiger. But then as Native Americans came across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia and worked their way down the continent, they hunted to extinction many of the megafauna of North America, including the saber-toothed tiger. That's a theory, but we're still left with the thing, why on earth do pronghorns run 60 miles an hour? So I would suggest that perhaps the jackalope, which is rumored to run 90 miles an hour, evolved to escape the saber-toothed jackalope, which is a creature that is believed to exist by a very small group of people that only includes me. The coelacanth. This is a creature that lived about 66 million years ago and is found in the fossil record. It's a strange creature, and it's difficult to get information on it because of the difficulty in spelling its name. But this is how it's spelled. Coelacanth is how that's pronounced. Enjoy. The strange thing about this creature is that it has its fins on limb-like appendages. They stick out on stalks that almost look like either they're trying to grow into legs or at one time they were legs and they're turning slowly into fins. In addition, its otherwise fishy-looking tail has a series of vertebrae running down the middle of it, and that ends in a little protuberance. It almost looks like in the middle of the fish's tail, there's some sort of reptile or mammal tail sticking out. Strange creature. An oddity of the fossil record. Marjorie Courtney Latimer was a museum curator in East London in South Africa. Apparently there's an East London in South Africa, who came across a fascinating specimen of the coelacanth in a fish market. In 1938, she was going through a fish market in South Africa and found a freshly caught and killed creature that looked very, very much like a coelacanth. Now, in terms of the this can't be real category, she bought the 130-pound fish, brought it back to the museum, and the chairman of the board of the museum dismissed it as, oh, that's just some sort of bass, and he went off on his vacation. Whether he did this because it was impossible that it was something only known from the fossil record, or because he didn't take her seriously because she was a woman, is an open question. But the fact is that Marjorie didn't give up. She got in touch with JLB Smith, who is the museum curator of fisheries of South Africa. Strange title. And she called him. And when he didn't get back to her right away, she wrote him a letter and she sketched the fish in the letter. Very shortly, JLB Smith got back to Marjorie saying that the sketch he had included in the description were giving him many sleepless nights and he couldn't wait to see it. When he finally got over to East London to take a look at this thing, he said that first sight hit me like a white-hot blast and made me feel shaky and queer. My body tingled. I stood as if stricken to stone. Yes, it was a true coelacanth. Marjorie Courtney Latimer had found something that was supposed to be extinct for over 60 million years, brought up in a fisherman's net in South Africa in the 1930s. On the wharf where it was caught, which is now called Marjorie's Landing. Oh, there's a live coelacanth, by the way, hanging out with some divers. They're not real fast-moving fish. And boy, some of them even just sort of look old, which is odd. At any rate, on the landing, which is now called Latimer's Landing, is a plaque commemorating her discovery. The guy who caught it too, but he didn't know what he had. She's the one who figured it out. And the scientific name of it, Latimeria chelumnae Smith. So apparently the guy who definitively identified it as a coelacanth got his name in there too. But there are two species of coelacanth that are known to be alive in the world today, and their genus name, Latimeria, is a testament to the woman who found it in the first place and wouldn't give up. So if you've enjoyed Jim's Friday Freakout today, I hope that you'll like and subscribe below, just like Celie and Jackie. And if you would take the time, please do check us out on Patreon. For as little as $3 a month, you can help us to keep this wonderful content coming. Laughs, education, inspiration with fresh content coming to you 5 days a week. So please do check us out there. So many sources I need to thank today. And this isn't even a complete list, but Slides Carnival created the template that I used today. Tenor.com was a source of information. The Billings, Montana Gazette, the Natural History Museum in England, the Australian Dictionary of Biography, Smithsonian Magazine, always a winner, legendsofamerica.com for some of the information on the jackalope. Thank you so much. Some of the photographs came from Unsplash and from Nature Photo. So thanks to these and all my other sources for helping to make the show possible today. And thank to all of you for tuning in. See you next week.